When I saw her, my heart raced. Not because she was beautiful in the conventional sense, but because she looked familiar. Unsettlingly familiar. Like a memory I couldn't access fully. Like a dream I had once, and then forgot. And yet, seeing her brought something silent and old stirring in my chest. It was at a private charity gala. I was there working, wearing a borrowed uniform that didn't quite fit, serving champagne to people who'd never known hunger, fear, or the sound of their own stomach turning from anxiety. My life had taught me to move quietly, never draw attention, keep my eyes low. But the moment she walked into the room, I looked. She was tall, poised, dressed in a dark green silk gown that flowed like water around her body. Her hair was silver but elegant, pulled back with a few strands falling gently across her cheekbones. She didn't walk like someone trying to impress. She walked like someone who had nothing to prove. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. But something inside me whispered, I've seen her before. She sat alone. No one dared approach her table, yet many stole glances. There was an invisible line drawn around her, of respect, of fear, of power. But I was drawn in, against my own will. The first time our eyes met, it was like hitting a wall of silence. Everything around us, the music, the chatter, the laughter, vanished. Her gaze didn't judge. It didn't invite either. It simply knew. I looked away quickly, embarrassed by my own curiosity, by how my pulse betrayed me. But I couldn't shake it. Why does she feel so familiar? Later that evening I served her table. She didn't speak. She barely moved, only stirred her tea slowly, as if she were measuring time by its rhythm. I placed the silver tray gently, trying not to tremble. As I turned to leave, she said quietly, You look like someone I once loved. Her voice, soft, refined, with the kind of calm that only comes after surviving many storms, sank into me like warmth in winter. I paused, unsure if I should respond, but when I looked at her again, she was no longer watching me. She had returned to stirring her tea, as if nothing had been said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lived in a tiny rented room with peeling walls and one working light bulb. The bed creaked every time I shifted, but it wasn't the discomfort that kept me awake. It was her face, her voice, that strange ache in my chest, as if something had been unlocked and I didn't know what to do with it. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the mind, projection, loneliness. Maybe I reminded her of someone. Maybe she reminded me of the idea of comfort, of elegance, of a life I'd never touched. But still, I couldn't forget her. 3 days passed. Then on a Tuesday morning, I walked into the small cafe near my work, where I always stopped to drink something hot before my shift, and froze. She was there, sitting in the corner by the window, dressed in gray, reading a book with a cracked leather cover. She didn't look up, didn't act like she was waiting for anyone, but she was alone. Again. I ordered a tea I couldn't afford and sat 2 tables away, pretending to check my phone. But I was watching her hands, the way she turned the pages gently with care, the way her expression didn't move, composed, unreadable. Why was she here? Coincidence? On the 3rd day she returned to that cafe. She finally looked up as I walked in. You're always late, she said. I stopped in my tracks. There was no anger in her tone, just expectation, like I was someone who belonged there, like I was someone she had been waiting for. Do I know you? I asked, cautiously. She smiled. The first time I'd seen it. Not yet. Then she stood, walked past me slowly, and pressed something into my hand. An envelope. Open it tomorrow, not today. Why? Because today you're still afraid. And then she walked out. I held the envelope for an hour before I even put it in my pocket. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My thoughts ran wild. Who was she? Why did she know my name? And why did I feel, with an ache I couldn't explain, that this moment had been written long before I was ever born? I didn't open the envelope. Not right away. I tucked it into the drawer beneath my mattress, the one that barely opened without groaning. That envelope felt like a door, and I wasn't ready to walk through it. Not yet. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The flickering street lamp outside painted crooked shadows across the cracked paint above my head. I thought about her voice, her stillness, her eyes, so calm they made mine feel exposed. She had said I was afraid. She was right. Not just afraid of her, or whatever might be inside that envelope, but afraid of being seen, truly seen. I had spent most of my life trying to disappear. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the forgotten one, the kid who knew better than to cry too loudly. I learned that silence kept me safe, until it didn't. The accident happened when I was 16, a car crash that should have killed me. My leg still reminded me every day that I survived, but no one ever asked how it changed me on the inside. They saw the limp and assumed that was the wound, but the real one was deeper, invisible. And then she came, a woman with silver hair and secrets behind her eyes. A stranger who saw through the noise of my existence like someone who had lived 1,000 lifetimes, and still chose to look at me. The next day I returned to the cafe. She wasn't there. I stayed for an hour, 2, ordered the cheapest drink and stared at the entrance. Nothing. I went back the day after that, same thing. On the 3rd day, she returned. She wore a white coat, the kind that draped over her shoulders like it had belonged to someone royal. She walked past me without a word and sat in the same seat, opened her book, waited. After 10 minutes, I finally stood and walked to her table. "You told me to open it yesterday." She closed the book slowly. "And did you?" I shook my head. "Why?" I wanted to say, "Because I don't trust you. Because I don't trust anyone. Because I'm scared that whatever you wrote will awaken something I've worked so hard to keep buried." But instead, I just said, "I wasn't ready." She nodded like she already knew. Then she gestured to the seat across from her. I sat. It was the first time we were this close. I could see the lines around her eyes, not from frowning, but from decades of quiet observation. Her skin was soft, pale, fragile almost. But her presence? It was iron wrapped in silk. We didn't speak for several minutes. Just sipped tea. I could feel the pulse in my throat. Finally, she said, "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" I didn't respond. A man who spent his whole life waiting for permission to exist, who's apologized for his presence in every room, who's never been chosen, but who has always longed to be. My hands curled into fists under the table. "I'm not a victim," I said, sharper than I intended. Her voice remained steady. "I didn't say you were. Victims collapse. You survived. That's different." And then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, she said, "Come with me." "Where?" "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere honest." Before I could answer, she stood. We didn't speak again until we were in the back seat of a car that smelled of jasmine and old leather. The windows were tinted. The silence was almost holy. She didn't look at me, just watched the city pass, like she'd seen it too many times to be impressed. We arrived at a private garden surrounded by high white walls. Palm trees rustled in the wind. Water trickled from an ancient stone fountain in the center. There was no one else, just us. She walked ahead, her footsteps slow but sure. I followed. "This was my husband's favorite place," she said finally, touching a pale rose that had started to wilt. "You were married?" She nodded. "Many years, until cancer decided we'd had enough time." I didn't know what to say. She looked at me then, not like someone grieving, but like someone remembering the shape of love. He was kind and brilliant, but he never looked at me the way you did that night. My breath caught. "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did. You looked at me like I was familiar, like I belonged to some forgotten part of you." I swallowed hard, because she was right. She turned toward me and placed her hand gently on my chest, right over my heart. Not intimately, but symbolically. "Whatever you're running from," she said, "I don't need to fix it. I just want to know it." And in that moment I realized she didn't want to own me. She wanted to witness me. That night, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "I'm not offering you a job, I'm offering you truth. Come back tomorrow. If you don't, I'll understand. But if you do, leave your fear at the gate." Below the note was a key and a card that simply said, "Villa Al Amin, 4 p.m. I didn't sleep that night either, but this time it wasn't because of fear. It was because for the first time in my life, someone had seen me. The key she gave me led to a place I couldn't have imagined. Villa Al Amin stood alone beyond the edge of the city, surrounded by desert silence and white stone. It wasn't ostentatious like the mansions in magazines. It was ancient, sacred almost, the kind of place that held stories in its walls, the kind of place where time forgot to hurry. I arrived early, she was already there. She stood in the garden, surrounded by olive trees and silence, dressed in white linen, barefoot. The breeze lifted the fabric around her like mist. She wasn't just standing, she was waiting. When she saw me, she didn't smile, she only said, "You came." I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. She led me through the villa without saying much. It was filled with old books, faded rugs, and oil paintings that whispered of eras long gone. No servants, no guards, just the echo of our footsteps on cool marble. Finally, we sat in a room with arched windows and soft light. Tea was already prepared. She poured it with the same grace she did everything, with the slowness of someone who had nothing to prove, nothing to chase. "Do you know," she said, handing me the cup, "why I brought you here?" I shook my head. "Because I want to offer you something. Not a job, not charity, something different." I waited. The silence between us was never uncomfortable. It was like a language neither of us had to learn. We already spoke it. "You've lived your life being useful to others," she said softly. "But I don't want your service, I want your presence." My fingers tightened around the cup. Presence for what? She looked at me then, truly looked. Her eyes didn't demand, they invited. "I want you to marry me." The words hit the air like a stone dropped in still water. I laughed, not out of mockery but disbelief. "What?" I asked, stunned. "You don't even know me." "That's not true," she said. "I know you better than most people ever cared to. And you know me in ways others never tried to." I looked away. My heart pounded in my ears. "Why would you want that?" She leaned back, graceful even in stillness. "Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life around people who only come close for power, money, or pity. I want something real. And you are real. Purely, painfully real." I didn't answer. She continued, her tone soft but unshakable. "This isn't about love. At least not the kind they sell in movies. I'm not asking for devotion or affection. I'm asking for truth. Companionship, freedom. A connection that doesn't depend on age or appearances." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You could have anyone." She smiled, tired but warm. "That's exactly the problem." The wind shifted outside. The curtains danced. My thoughts spiraled. This was absurd, insane, impossible. And yet, everything in me was calm. She stood and walked toward the window, then turned back to me. "I won't ask twice, Daniel. You can walk away and I'll never mention it again. I'll understand. But if you say yes, I promise you this, you'll never have to apologize for existing again." Tears burned behind my eyes. Not because I loved her, but because I felt for the first time chosen, not used, not tolerated, seen. I stood slowly, walked toward her. I didn't kiss her, didn't touch her, just looked into her eyes and whispered, "Yes." Her lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in quiet gratitude. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Then let us live our days with dignity and silence. We owe no explanations to the world." And that was it. No grand gestures, no rings, no papers signed that day. Just two souls agreeing to walk side by side for as long as they could endure the same sky. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want to share her with the noise of the world. The wedding happened quietly. No guests, no orchestra, no headlines. Only a small signature on an ancient paper in her native language, witnessed by a man who had served her family for decades and spoke very little. I didn't even know his name. He smiled once, then left without saying a word. She wore a dress the color of ivory sand, light and simple. I wore a white tunic she had chosen for me. No tie, no suit, no pressure to become someone I wasn't. It wasn't a performance. It was a vow whispered to the universe in a language only our hearts understood. After the ceremony, she led me by candlelight through the garden, then into the villa. The night was quiet, warm, endless. The moon above us was round and watching. I remember thinking, I've never seen a night so still. She opened the door to a private room I had never entered before. The curtains were drawn. A single lamp cast soft shadows over shelves of old books and faded photographs. There was no bed, only two armchairs facing each other, and a low table between them. On the table, a dark wooden box carved with delicate floral patterns. She gestured for me to sit. Then she sat across from me. "This is our night," she said. "Not to consume, not to possess, but to offer." She opened the box. Inside there were documents, thick envelopes sealed with wax, several bank keys and a leather journal. She didn't hesitate. One by one she placed them in my hands. "This," she said, "is yours. Not in the future, not after I'm gone. Now." I stared at her. "Why?" She poured tea for both of us. "Because I want you to live your life. Not as someone waiting for permission. Not as someone owned, but as someone free." My throat tightened. "I didn't marry you for this." "I know," she whispered. "That's why you deserve it." We drank in silence. I held the documents like they were made of glass. Accounts, transfers, passwords. She explained nothing, as if she trusted I would do with them what my heart told me to do. Then she reached for the leather journal and handed it to me. "This is the only explanation you'll get." I opened it. The first page was blank, the second too. The third page held only this: "You reminded me of who I used to be, and who I never dared to be." I looked up. She was watching me, not with possession, but with peace. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "You're not bound to me. I won't hold you here. In fact, I hope you go. I hope you travel, live, touch the world with your softness. Let people see what I saw in you. Be something wild and kind." I felt my chest crack open, not from sadness, but from being loved without being held hostage. No one had ever given me anything without expecting something in return. And now this woman, this Sheikha, had handed me her life's legacy and asked for nothing but my freedom. I stood. My legs trembled. She stood too, slowly, with effort. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. I bowed my head. She did the same. That was our consummation, not of body, but of soul. That night I couldn't sleep, not because of guilt, but because I had no idea what to do with so much love. I didn't leave. I could have. I had the keys to everything, her accounts, her properties, her blessings. She gave me the map and told me to run toward the horizon. And yet, I stayed. Not because I owed her, not because I was afraid, but because something inside me had finally learned how to feel safe. And I couldn't walk away from that. Not now. Not while she was still breathing the same air as me. The first time I noticed the change in her, it was subtle. She paused for just a moment longer before standing up from her chair. Her breath caught a little at the top of the stairs. Her hands trembled ever so slightly while pouring tea. She smiled when she noticed me watching. "Time comes for all of us," she said, as if it were no more serious than the weather. But I didn't laugh, because I felt it. Something was shifting. Her silence deepened and her walks in the garden became shorter. She stopped reading. The book remained open on the same page for days. Then came the morning when I found her still in bed, her face pale, her voice quiet. "Don't be alarmed," she whispered as I rushed to her side. "You're just tired," I said. "That's all." She smiled with her eyes closed. "We all get tired eventually." I brought her water, called for the best doctor I could find, canceled everything else in my world. But she didn't fight it. She didn't rage. She simply slowed. And so I slowed with her. Every day I sat beside her. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she didn't. But I stayed. I read to her even when I knew she wasn't listening. I lit candles in the evening and left them burning into the night. I played the old music she liked, the ones she used to hum under her breath when she thought I wasn't listening. I wrote in her journal, not my own, hers. I filled the empty pages with memories she had given me, her words, her gestures, her silences. I wrote what I never had the courage to say out loud. "You didn't save me with money. You saved me by not expecting me to perform for it. You looked at me and didn't flinch. You gave me silence, and in it, I found myself." Sometimes I cried beside her bed, quietly, so she wouldn't hear. Other times I just held her hand while pretending to read aloud, knowing she had drifted into sleep. The staff began to whisper. Some thought I was waiting for her to die, that I stayed because I wanted more. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear how she called my name in the middle of the night, in a whisper so fragile it broke my heart. They didn't feel her fingers clutch mine like I was the only lifeline she still trusted. They didn't see me carry her to the garden when she couldn't walk anymore, just so she could sit for 5 minutes under the sun she loved. This wasn't obligation. This wasn't duty. It was the most sacred thing I had ever known. She began to sleep more than she was awake. Her body grew thinner, her skin more translucent, as if she were becoming part of the light. One afternoon, while I was feeding her broth in silence, she opened her eyes and whispered, "You stayed." I nodded. "Of course, but I told you not to." "I know," I said, "but love doesn't follow instructions." A tear escaped the corner of her eye. I wiped it gently. "I thought I gave you freedom," she murmured, "but you gave it back to me." I didn't reply. I just kissed the back of her hand and placed it over my heart. I wanted to tell her that even if she had given me nothing, not a single coin or key, I would have still chosen her. Not because she needed me, but because with her, I wasn't invisible. And when you've lived your whole life as a shadow, being seen feels like salvation. The nights became longer, her breaths shorter, but even then she was never afraid. There was no fear in her eyes, only peace, and a strange sort of anticipation, like someone watching the final sunset of a very long journey. She never asked me to stay. Not once. She just knew I would, and I did. Because that's what you do when someone gives you back your name, your worth, your place in the world. You hold their hand until the very end. The morning she died, the sky was quiet. No wind, no birdsong. Even the palms around the villa stood still, as if they too were holding their breath. I knew before I entered her room. I felt it. That strange absence. Not of air, not of sound, but of presence. Like something eternal had quietly stepped away. She was still, eyes closed, mouth soft. One hand resting over her heart, the other loose on the blanket. There were no gasps, no final words, no drama, just stillness. I sat beside her, took her hand and whispered, "Thank you. Not for the money, not for the freedom, but for choosing me. For seeing something in me that I didn't even know was there." I stayed there with her for hours. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat in silence, breathing with the emptiness. The funeral was small, no press, no announcements. Just a private gathering in the garden she loved, among the olive trees and the rose bushes we had once walked through together. I buried her with the journal I had filled. No speeches, no headlines, just a single line carved into the stone. She saw him, and he stayed. After her burial, the villa felt hollow, not haunted, just finished. Like a story that had finally accepted its final chapter. And then came the moment I feared the most. What now? I had her fortune, her estate, her access, everything. For days I walked the halls in silence. I opened drawers, touched fabrics, smelled her perfume in the folds of her shawls. She was gone, and yet everywhere. People began to call. Lawyers, distant relatives, reporters. Some trying to be subtle, others shameless. They all wanted something, but I already knew what I would do. She hadn't given me riches, she had given me worth, and I wasn't going to waste it. So I started with the children. I bought an old school building in the poorest neighborhood I could find and turned it into a home for abandoned boys. I named it after her. Not her title, just her name. The one she whispered to me once, quietly, when no one else was listening. Then I funded scholarships for girls in rural villages who had never seen a classroom. I sent books, food, blankets. I built water wells in dry cities and paid hospital bills for families I would never meet. And I did it in her name, but without showing mine. The world saw the generosity. They just didn't know the story behind it. Because some stories aren't meant to be explained. Years passed. I aged slowly, quietly. I never remarried. Not because I was broken, but because I had been complete once, and I didn't need more than that. Sometimes I sit in that same cafe where I first saw her again. Same corner, same table. People pass me by, they don't look, they don't know. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I see her sitting across from me, stirring her tea, smiling without smiling. And I whisper, just loud enough for the wind to carry, "I stayed, and I became everything you believed I could be." If this story touched your heart, leave a rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. And if you believe true love still exists, subscribe to Written Destiny Official. Here, every story has a soul,